Alicia, I think everyone from the waiting room is now here. So when you're ready, we can get started.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. The Honorable Corinne James, Minister of Climate Resilience, the Environment and Renewable Energy, Grenada. Her Excellency Jacinth Henry Martin, Ambassador, Permanent Representative of St. Kitts and Nevis to the Organization of American States. Her Excellency Yolande Smith, Coordinator of the Coordinating Office of the Offices and Units of the General Secretariat of the Organization of American States in member states. Alejandra Mora Mora, Executive Secretary of the Inter-American Commission of Women, Organization of American States. Dr. Halima Deschamps, University Director, Institute for Gender and Development Studies, Regional Coordinating Office, University of the West Indies. Janelle Vlanganahwego, OAS Representative, Office of the General Secretariat of the Organization of American States in Jamaica. Esteemed participants, colleagues, and students, good morning. It is my distinct pleasure to welcome you all to this important virtual symposium on gender, climate, and economic justice, a virtual conversation with policy shapers, academia, and activists. My name is Alicia Haynes, lecturer at the Institute for Gender and Development Studies, Nita Barrow Unit, and I have the pleasure of serving as your moderator today. This virtual symposium is hosted in collaboration with the Office of the General Secretariat of the Organization of American States in Jamaica, the Executive Secretariat of the Inter-American Commission of Women, and the Regional Coordinating Office of the Institute for Gender and Development Studies at the University of the West Indies. Today, we gather scholars, policymakers, activists, and practitioners to engage in a meaningful conversation at the intersection of gender, climate, and economic justice. We are witnessing the devastating impact of wildfires, record-breaking heat waves, catastrophic floods, and increasingly unpredictable weather patterns across the globe. These events do more than disrupt daily life. They amplify social and economic inequalities, hitting hardest those who are already marginalized. Climate change is not a distant threat, it is here, and it is now. It compels us to rethink, to reimagine, and to reshape our policies, our priorities, and even our identities in response to these evolving crises. The Caribbean stands at the forefront of this reality. Our islands bear the brunt of climate change through increasingly severe hurricanes, coastal erosion, and prolonged droughts that threaten agriculture, food security, and livelihoods. But these challenges rooted vulnerable. As phase one of the collaboration between the CIM, OAS, and the IGDS-UE, the Symposium on Gender, Climate, and Economic Justice is the beginning of a multi-stakeholder conversation among the OAS, academia, the public and private sectors, as well as civil society. Today's dialogue is grounded in rigorous academic inquiry and informed by evidence-based solutions. This forum is a call to action, one that bridges regions, fosters cross-border collaboration, and empowers a new generation of diverse leaders dedicated to protecting our communities and environment. As we begin, let us engage with a spirit of cooperation and a shared commitment to meaningful exchange. With that, I now invite our first speaker, Janelle Vlanganahwego, OAS representative from the Office of the General Secretariat of the OAS in Jamaica, to deliver her opening remarks.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Honorable Minister of Climate Resilience, the Environment and Renewable Energy of Grenada, Minister Karine James, Ambassador Jacinth Henry Martin, Permanent Representative of St. Kitts and Nevis to the OAS, Ambassador Yolan Smith, Coordinator of the Coordinating Office for the offices and units of the OAS General Secretariat in Member States, Alejandra Mora Mora, Executive Secretary of the Inter-American Commission of Women, Dr. Halima Deschamps, University Director of the Institute for Gender and Development Studies, the Regional Coordinating Office of the University of the West Indies, other OAS and IGDS colleagues, panelists, viewers, a pleasant good morning from the Office of the OAS General Secretariat in Jamaica. Welcome to today's online discussion on gender, climate, and economic justice. In our increasingly interconnected world, the need for collaboration has never been more urgent, as our moderator just pointed out. The challenges we face today, such as climate change, gender inequality, and economic disparity, do not recognize borders. These issues can therefore only be addressed comprehensively and sustainably through cooperation and collaboration across borders, cultures, and disciplines to ensure that the future we build is one that is inclusive, just, and sustainable. Within the OAS General Secretariat, departments and units seek to work closer together to get maximum benefit from the work of the OAS. The offices of the OAS General Secretariat in member states are strategically placed to heighten the visibility of the OAS, collaborate with stakeholders and partners in the member states, and create strategic linkages between the technical areas of the OAS and stakeholders in member states. We in the Office of the OAS General Secretariat in Jamaica are therefore pleased to have partnered with the Institute of Gender and Development Studies of the University of the West Indies and the Inter-American Commission of Women of the OAS to have this timely discussion today as we continue to celebrate Women's Month. We look forward to a productive virtual event of insightful exchanges and fruitful deliberations. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Janelle Van Glanovagel, for setting the tone for today's discussions. Next, we turn to Alejandra Mora Mora, Executive Secretary of the Inter-American Commission of Women, and Dr. Halima Deschamps, University Director of the IGDS-RCO RUE, who will speak on the importance of the alliances and articulation for gender, climate, and economic justice.
So, thank you, Alicia. Good morning, distinguished panelists, invited guests and participants. Really is my pleasure to welcome to our virtual forum representative of academia and activism on gender, climate, and economic justice. Within this month dedicated to women, this marks the good time that the Inter-American Commission of Women of the Organization of American States are jointly hosting such an event with the Regional Institutes of Gender and Development and the University of the West Indies. Thank you, Dr. Jalina Dichon, for this alliance. As you're aware, this year marks the 30th anniversary of the Beijing Platform for Action to Assess Our Progress and address our challenges in implementation, and to the CIM 40 Assembly of Delegates in April 2025, we will discussing women's economic rights. Currently, on a global scale, many recent political, economic, social, and environmental shifts are redefining the landscape and having an impact of women's economic rights. As the premier hemispheric forum for protecting, preserving, and progressing women's rights and equality, remains committed to the women participation at the decision-making levels of inclusive democracy and sustainable development. The Caribbean region faces multiple vulnerabilities characteristic of us small island states. Therefore, for SIM, it is important to foster conversation among policymakers, activists, and academics to generate action and curate sustainable solutions for reducing the impact of natural disasters of the lives of women and families. We are excited to have with us here today civil society representatives from Jamaica, Guyana, and Suriname who help empower grassroots activism and micro and small business activity for women, especially in the blue and green economies. They are joined by leading experts and the tripartite gender institutes of the University of the West Indies from Barbados, Trinidad and Tobago, and Jamaica campuses. Together, you are the two hands which help shape and engender regional policy making and development issues. We also list to personally recognize to Honorable Henry James from Grenada, Ambassador Jason Henry Martin, and Ambassador Yolanda Smith, my friend. Thank you to stay here. This forum falls within the Inter-American Decade for the Rights of Women, Adolescents, and Girls in Rural Areas of the Americas, where the states commit to promoting policies and actions to focus on the rights of women in rural settings to strengthen their capacity for leaderships and decision-making in the process and public policy formulation. We, therefore, take this opportunity to highlight the powerful grassroots activisms, the voices of women in academia, women in the civil society, and women leaders on the national, regional, and international fronts to build capacity, demand action, and call for financial to mitigate environmental and ecological disasters. In framing today's discussion of women, climate, and economic justice in the Caribbean, we need to give a stronger focus to the pivotal role of tourism's plays, which is the dominant economic driver in the region for most of its economies, especially the small islands developing states. According to the World Travel and Tourism Council, this industry represents almost 14% of the region's gross domestic product. This is the highest share of any region in the world. Tourism industries relied on agriculture, production, and fisheries, making it fundamental for job creation, economic growth, and income. Women, the director of the indirect economic activity within these industries is key to any discussion of economic justice. So we need to contemplate that the small region in the peculiar for having about 47% of households headed by women as the sole economic contributor, and 2022 survey showed growing food insecurity despite access to market. So with the growing global shifts and natural hazard, food insecurity in the Caribbean is a growing concern because of its impact on poverty and extreme poverty, where women are affected by situations of economic precarity and unemployment. A space like this one amplify women's voices to generate strengthened alliance with the Caribbean and further catalyze and catapult our hemisphere efforts to promote women's rights and equality. So let's go to work together. Thanks for stay here.
Thank you, Alejandra Mora, for emphasizing how connection and alliance are essential to advancing our work on gender, climate, and economic justice. Now over to you, Dr. Deschamps.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thanks for offering me the floor, Alicia, and I recognize you in your role as moderator. I'll also like to recognize the Honorable Karine James, Minister of Climate Resilience for the Environment and Renewable Energy in Grenada. Welcome, Minister. I also recognize Her Excellency Henry Martin, Ambassador, Permanent Representative of St. Kitts and Nevis to the Organization of American States, Her Excellency Smith, Coordinator of the Coordinating Office for Offices and Units of the General Secretary to the Organization of American States, Alejandra Mora, Executive Secretary of the Inter-American Commission of Women of the OAS, Her Excellency Janelle Van Glanavagel, OAS Representative, Office of the General Secretariat of the Organization of American States, our representatives and heads of women's organizations working on climate justice in the region, our students present, our faculty, heads of the IGDS units present. I'll also like to recognize those who represent policy making and programming in the States, as you will come with very keen insights today as part of this conversation. Good morning, everyone. Welcome, and thank you for being here and for collaborating with us for this dialogue. Conservative estimates on the effects of the more than 200 hurricanes to have occurred in the Caribbean between 1950 and 2014 suggest an average cost of 2.5% of GDP annually. Climate change has increased the frequency, we know, and intensity of these events, with devastating socioeconomic consequences for the Caribbean. We know that climate-related natural hazards and extreme weather events create and compound economic shocks. For most Caribbean countries, economic growth has slowed for more than a decade, but as evidenced by the COVID-19 pandemic, although the region was prepared to handle some shocks, our dependence on global tourism demand, as you heard from Alejandra, our dependence on global tourism demand increases our volatility. We are also well aware that the effects of these events are not evenly distributed. Climate adaptation and resilience work must continue to more directly prioritize how forms of difference and inequality intersect in the lives of people, particularly persons most likely to be made marginal as a consequence of gender, of race, of disability, disability, geographies, and socioeconomic conditions in the Caribbean. Women's organizations, and specifically those organizing to mitigate the effects of climate change in the region, are at the front lines of working with and in communities where lives and livelihoods are far more likely to be encumbered in the face of climate change, climate-related extreme weather events, natural hazards, loss of biodiversity, marine degradation, and related food and water insecurity. Persons, particularly women and children, who confront multiple inequalities in their everyday lives are at increased exposure to climate-related risk, with reduced capacity to prepare for and to manage their impacts. Beginning with the 1970s, Women in the Caribbean Project research and subsequent work conducted by the Institute for Gender and Development Studies, by the Sir Arthur Lewis Institute for Social and Economic Research, SALISIS, by SEDIMA, by development agencies, and with the support of regional governments, we learn about the gendered realities of poverty, violence, access to meaningful livelihoods, and the inequalities of unpaid labor and care activities. In the Caribbean, the significant proportion of households headed by women tend to be poorer households. Recent reports produced by the Engender Project, which was a collaboration across development agencies in the region and Caribbean governments, reveal the gendered effects of natural hazards and climate change for women in agriculture and fisheries across several countries in the region. Highlighted by this research are the ways in which existing forms of social stratification become amplified in times of climate-related hazards and extreme weather events. For women in agriculture and fisheries, when disaster strikes, when disaster strikes, their capacity and timeline for recovery is much more encumbered when compared to men. This is largely due to women's greater labor and care, women's related lower levels of savings to act as a buffer in times of crisis, women's reduced access to credit, and the very significant percentage of households headed by women, which tend to be more economically disadvantaged households. We are also well aware of the increased likelihood that women, girls, and children will experience increased levels of sexual and gendered violence against them when disaster strikes. It is against this backdrop that we welcome today's dialogue on gender, climate, and economic justice. I take this opportunity to express sincerest gratitude on behalf of the Institute for Gender and Development Studies here at the University of the West Indies to our friends and partners at the Organization of the American States through its Inter-American Commission on Women and the Office of the General Secretariat in Jamaica. In the wake of the first UN Gender Equality Forum held in the framework of the 4th International Conference on Small Island Development States that was held last May in Antigua and Barbuda, the IGDS and our OAS and OASIM partners joined the call for a stronger government with gender machinery movements, feminist and women's organizations, and networks of women and people organizing in communities to support gender, climate, and social justice. This morning, we are especially pleased to learn with partners in civil society, state policymaking and programming, academia, and international development. I also take this opportunity to underscore, like Alejandra has done before, the salience of strategic partnerships, of collaboration and solidarity in climate action in us and in other regions of the world. In our experience in the IGDS, intersectoral and interdisciplinary collaboration characterize our engagement in climate justice research projects and action. And for example, we know that the St. Augustine unit of the IGDS has done work on the National Bush and Forest Fire Policy in conjunction with the Fondes Amans Community Reforestation Program. We know that in the past, the Regional Coordinating Office of the IGDS has done research on rural women, adaptability and resilience to climate change. Dr. Natasha Motley has done extensive work on gender mainstreaming for natural disaster risk and climate change. We know of the Nita Barrow unit's climate, gender, and water resource management work supported by 5Cs and the done for training and capacity building with workers at the Barbados Water Authority. We teach from the Mona campus unit of the IGDS courses on gender, climate change, disaster risk management. Various IGDS faculty have been engaged in doing climate justice work and interventions with various civil society and government entities, as well as international development organizations. And we are gearing up to deliver, as part of the UWI's International School of Development Justice, a master's program on gender justice, activism, and sustainable development, of which gender and climate justice is a very critical pillar to that training, as well as developing curriculum in more research and training in the area of gender and climate justice. So we are committed and we remain committed in doing this. We'll close these brief remarks by spotlighting how as citizens in this region, climate justice related harms reach into all dimensions of who we are. We must never ignore the spiritual, the psychic, the affective, the physical and psychological consequences of what is at stake if we fail to work collectively to confront what we know to be the most urgent concern for us as a global community. For this, I close with the reflections of Puerto Rican indigenous climate activist Karine M. Cortijo Robles. And she says, and I quote, "Climbing the twisty hills of Utodo is scary, but ultimately it is the only way to get to one of the 2 indigenous ceremonial centers in the Caribbean. As a child, I loved visiting this place because it was overflowing with history that you can touch and feel. By this, I mean that it is full of huge plazas that have rocks with indigenous petroglyphs that are like drawings. We are losing our history due to the phenomenon associated with climate change. As time goes by, hurricanes hit our ancestral monuments harder. I can no longer see the structures and petroglyphs on the rocks as easily. I wish for a future where communities can understand the importance of this unique indigenous legacy and its necessary conservation through sustainable measures. Our cultural heritage is one of many reasons why we must demand clean energy and better services, not only for our ancestors, but also for the present communities linked to this place. End of quote. Friends, partners, colleagues, we know what is at stake for how we live and how we can live and thrive in this region. With this in mind, we remain committed to protecting what we have and to building futures in harmony with these lands and waters that sustain us. Peace and blessings, and I look forward to the dialogue this morning.
Thank you so much, Dr. Deschamps, for highlighting the importance of the data in understanding the socio-economic consequences of climate change for the Caribbean, particularly in how these challenges disproportionately affect women and children, highlighting their vulnerability to economic instability, displacement, and various forms of violence and exploitation. Now we move into our first panel discussion, which focuses on research and policy implications of a gender, climate, economic justice lens. This panel will be moderated by Hilary Anderson, Senior Gender Specialist of the Inter-American Commission of Women, Organization of American States. Since finishing her degrees in political science and development studies at McGill University in Montreal, Hilary has worked with the Pan-American Health Organization's Gender and Health Unit and with the United Nations International Research and Training Institute for the Advancement of Women. In 2010, Hilary joined the staff of the Inter-American Commission of Women at the Organization of American States, where she works as senior specialist on women's rights and gender equality issues in the region. From this position, she has led the development of knowledge and capacity building tools to support closing the gap between the international legal framework on women's rights and national level laws and policies. We also have a distinguished panel with us today, featuring heads of department of the Institute for Gender and Development Studies. First, we have Dr. Delia Bean, head of the Institute for Gender and Development Studies, Mona Campus, Dr. Suwan Barrett, head of the St. Augustine unit, as well as Dr. Tanya Haynes, head of the Nita Barrow unit. Our discussant for this session is the Honorable Corinne James, Minister of Climate Resilience, the Environment, and Renewable Energy, Grenada. I now turn over to Hilary, who will now take over the lead for this segment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alicia. I'm going to stand on the protocols that have already been observed. So good morning to everybody, and thank you so much for joining us. I will, however, introduce our distinguished panelists for this morning, beginning with Dr. Dahlia Bean, who's the head, as Alicia mentioned, of the Institute of Gender and Development Studies at the UWI Mona campus in Jamaica. Dr. Bean is a senior lecturer and head of the IGD, and I said that already. She's researched extensively in the areas of women and gender in Caribbean history, women in conflict situations, gender and education, women in the hotel and tourism industries, as well as other critical areas. She's been involved in gender justice advocacy and training for almost 20 years. A passionate gender and youth advocate, she serves as distinguished president of the Kiwanis Club of Young Professionals, Kingston, and is also a co-founder with Aaliyah Wedderburn of the foundation I Have Pretty Hair, focusing on empowering youth to be proud of and loving towards their natural hair. Dr. Sue-Ann Barrett, who's the head of the IGDS at the UWI St. Augustine campus in Trinidad and Tobago, is a lecturer and scholar of human communication and gendered expression and interaction. Dr. Barrett interrogates gender-based violence, especially as it manifests through social discourse. In addition, she explores the nuance and significance of social identities such as race and ethnicity, for example, through her more recent book, Douglas in the 21st Century, Adding to the Mix. In general, Dr. Barrett's research extends to human communication, conflict, social media use and its implications, mental health management and its implications for learners, gender and climate adaptation and resilience, and carnival and cultural studies. She's dedicated to building gender responsiveness and gender justice within society. Dr. Tanya Haynes, who's the head of the Institute Gender and Development Studies at the UWI Cave Hill campus in Barbados, as well as the Nito Barrow unit at the Nito Barrow unit, excuse me. Her current research examines Black Barbadian women's experiences of type 2 diabetes and gender and aging. Tanya's research on Caribbean feminisms and Caribbean feminist thought appears in Frontiers, a journal of women's studies, Small Axe, a Caribbean journal of criticism, Journal of Eastern Caribbean Studies, Essex Southwest Archipelagos, and the Scholar of Feminist Online. Her work on gendered violence appears in Global Public Health and Social and Economic Studies. She's a co-editor with Dr. Andrea Baldwin of Global Black Feminisms, Cross-Border Collaboration Through an Ethic of Care. Dr. Tanya Haynes has led many regional public scholarship initiatives aimed at capacity building for state functionaries and community activists and inclusive policymaking with LGBTQ+, disability rights, and women's organizations. These include 14th and 15th cycles of the Caribbean Institute in Gender and Development, an intensive training program, and a collaboration with the Caribbean Climate Change Community Center to train 500 staff and partners of the Barbados Water Authority on gender, water, and climate change. And finally, our discussant this morning after the panel is the Honorable Karine James, Minister of Climate Resilience, the Environment, and Renewable Energy of Grenada. In 2018, at just 20 years old, Karine James made history as the youngest individual appointed to Grenada's House of Senate and the Commonwealth of Nations, shattering barriers and setting an inspiring precedent for young women in leadership. Her tenure as senator was marked by advocacy for legislative reforms, championing the voices of those often unheard and steering the national agenda toward inclusive growth. This pioneering spirit led her to become the youngest elected member of parliament in Grenada, proudly representing the people of St. John as their parliamentary representative. As the only woman elected member of her party, she carries the torch of empowerment, showcasing the transformative power of women's leadership. Today, as Grenada's Minister for Climate Resilience, the Environment, and Renewable Energy, Karine stands at the intersection of humanity's greatest challenges and opportunities. With a Bachelor of Science in Psychology, she brings a nuanced understanding of human behavior, societal dynamics, and environmental stewardship to her role. Her leadership drives innovative policies that address the climate crisis, promote renewable energy, and build resilience for future generations. So I'll begin by inviting our panelists to make some opening remarks, and then I'll have some specific questions for each of them, and we'll end with some reflections from our discussant this morning. If time allows, we'll open it up for questions, and please do feel free to post your questions either in the Q&A section or in the chat section, and we'll address them after the panel. So I will begin by handing well, I guess not the floor, but the screen to Dr. Dahlia Bean. Go ahead with your initial reflections, please, Dr. Bean.
Thank you so much, Hilary. I appreciate the introduction, and good morning to all colleagues, distinguished guests. I'd first like to just congratulate the OAS and the IGDS on this really important partnership. I know it has been a long time in the making, and I'm really so happy to see that it has materialized today. And of course, in Women's Month, as we are speaking about some critical issues relating to women and gender. So we are in Women's Month, as we heard earlier, and so I just wanted to borrow the theme of accelerating action and noting a few areas that we have to celebrate and a few areas that we have to accelerate when we are thinking of these critical issues. One of the issues to be celebrated is the conversations such as this. This allows for knowledge sharing and debates. I'm sure that we will have some debates as we go along. About where we are and how we move forward. We also have to in policy and practice and the existence, for instance, in Jamaica, just a flag, of the Jamaica Gender and Climate Change Strategy and Action Plan. Things like this are very critical steps towards mainstreaming gender in the climate action and justice reform movement. Also, I want to flag, because I'm here particularly as not only the head of a department, but as someone who's teaching in gender and climate currently, I really want to flag the growing knowledge and interest of youth who see themselves as deeply connected to the future of climate justice and reform. But in preparing for today and thinking through these issues, there are three basic things that I think that need specific action and attention. One is our policy imperative. So for instance, in Jamaica, we have the Climate Change Policy Framework for Jamaica, which was revised in 2023. And I've noted that it includes 3 main goals, including strengthening Jamaica's adaptive capacity and resilience to reduce its vulnerability to climate change, pursuit of low carbon development and enhancement of access to and mobilization of climate finance, and promoting of public education and awareness raising, research, technology, and transfer towards an ambitious climate action, all of which are critical. Thankfully, gender is mentioned, but the considerations are mentioned in 2 very short paragraphs, which for the sake of time, I will not read at this point. And while we do have a gender action plan which accompanies this policy framework, the almost total absence of gender issues in the core of this policy is stark. Gender cannot come later in a mix and stir approach. We have to be serious about integrating identities in our policy framing. Not only gender, but geographic location, indigeneity, age, sex, ability, disability, religion. All of these are inextricably linked with the science, industry, and the finance of climate. More than this, it will take the voice and action of all who represent these intersections to make real and lasting changes. And I'm not by any means anything to do with science or math. But for me, meaningful inclusion and the power of partnerships will equal sustainable development. The second thing to flag is academia. And I think, as we heard from particularly our university director, we have to celebrate the work of Caribbean academia for centering climate justice long before policies existed to frame it. As we've heard, the IGDS, for instance, has been working for over 30 years in gendering climate action and initiatives, as well as teaching and research on the climate gender nexus. We have been teaching courses on climate for many years, producing a new army with the capacity to bridge the gap in various spaces. And very recently, we developed a graduate level course on climate justice through the International School for Development Justice. I also wanted to celebrate, to add to what Dr. Deschamps said, I wanted to celebrate the climate studies group at Mona, which is in physics and was formed in 1994 to explore climate issues in the Caribbean. They focus on ocean and atmospheric influences and various other aspects of the science and the livelihoods of climate change. A survey of the work, however, has revealed that this work, as I said, is largely based on science and has very low focus on critical gender issues. The call for action is not to be critical. It is for us at the IGDS and others in academia to build bridges with these existing organizations and colleagues at the university level who are doing climate work to accelerate academic action in relation to climate and gender issues. And finally, we have to be serious about youth and student involvement. I heard Dr. Mortley saying before that students are online. I too have invited my students. I should be teaching them gender and climate right now, and they're here. Some of them are here with us. And we have to celebrate youth groups. I'll flag for Jamaica very quickly, Jamaica Climate Change Youth Council and Girls Care, which stands for Climate Action for Resilience and Empowerment, who have realized that if not now, when? And if not them, who? These and other working in climate. So many light bulb moments where the students are forced to recognize the realness of climate and gender connectivity and their space in the strategies. And the energy, creativity, and innovation of youth, all of whom will inherit this earth with the meek, are critical to winning this war against climate change. And I'll stop there for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Beans. Particularly important, you're highlighting the role of academia in placing critical issues on the agenda before they necessarily become policy priorities. And I would add to that the role of academia in providing an evidence base for policy making around those issues when they do eventually become policy priorities. I will turn it over in that case to Dr. Barrett for your opening remarks. Please go ahead, Dr. Barrett.
Thank you very much, Hilary and to Dahlia and to the organizers of this session. It is a pleasure to be here and to contribute. And I'm going to build on what Dr. Bean just elaborated, the 3 entry points: policy, academia, and youth participation, youth and student participation. And thank you, Dr. Bean, for giving us some concrete areas or entry points or continued points to accelerate action in relation to gender, climate, and economic justice. My entry point is, as we work through academia, as we work through policy development, as we work through advocacy by youth or others in the region, we then need to evaluate what is our focus, what is our agenda, how do we keep shaping and framing that agenda. I begin by quoting Noel and et al. They wrote a review of our emerging research and knowledge production agenda in 2023. And they said, for more than 30 years, this notion of justice, particularly climate justice, which of course inherently intersects with gender, with economic, with energy, and other forms of justice and injustice, has been used to account for and contest how climate change is having the most severe effects on those with the least responsibility for causing it, and who at the same time are often excluded from decision-making processes regarding responses to the problem, whether with regard to climate mitigation or adaptation. We heard Dr. Bean mention about having a seat on that decision-making table as we accelerate action. There is now a considerable and growing, they say, literature on procedural, distributional, and intergenerational dimensions of climate justice. We must be able to understand that scope. And that would be my theme today, really exploring scope for accelerating action, including on questions of recognition, yet the meaning, scope, and practical implications of climate justice, and I dare add to their perspective, gender and economic justice, remain contested in this moment, reflecting the fact that the causes and effects of the challenges that we face, I frame that, of course, for today's attention, as well as the efforts to tackle it, continue to raise new ethical, equity, and rights issues around responsibility and compensation, and dare I add, decision-making, and ensuring that responses to climate crises are just as well as rapid, and definitely rooted in context, I would add to Noel and others' analysis. So, as we already know, because all the speakers have already made it salient, brought it to the fore, when we think about these intersecting in issues of injustice or justice, which will be the result of our action, we recognize that the global south is greatly affected, more vulnerable, particularly low-income women, most vulnerable. There are core themes in research and literature outside of the pure and applied sciences: adaptation strategies and governance. Intersectionality, Dr. Bean outlined all of these intersecting social identities a minute ago. And activism, energy coming from youth and continuing with those who have long dedicated their lives, and we'll hear from some today. Women-led movements play a central role in promoting fairer adaptation policies, and I dare say a lot of research applies ecofeminist perspectives, feminist perspectives, whole system perspectives, and of course ecosystem perspectives that then draw us closer to these fairer adaptation policies. Ecofeminism, as I just alluded, provides a critical framework for understanding the interactions between gender and climate justice and other forms of justice. So what am I suggesting to you? As I said earlier, we must then always evaluate and reevaluate and reimagine scope to continue to respond justly and with action and rapidly. We must examine mechanism and structures of power. If we are to address justice and injustice, I would say, along with all of these entry points that Delia would have outlined, our large categories of analysis: gender, economics, climate issues, but mechanisms and structures of vulnerability, sociopolitical, cultural, relational, material. These four intersecting mechanisms or structures or systems allow us to then examine power along with other things. Mechanisms and structures of adaptation and resilience. We would see that trends in research, especially in the global south, as I mentioned, then need to understand how we adapt and how we build resilience. We need to understand what vulnerability is and for whom. and how vulnerability is systemic. So that way, as we intervene through our advocacy groups, through academia, through policy development, through knowledge production, we are clear and share have a shared vision of this vulnerability that we're trying to mitigate or adapt to or build resilience around. So when we are talking about economic justice, investments must be targeted, consistent, focused on transformation, behavior transformation, system transformation, effects transformation. Women's enmeshed vulnerability in anthropogenic climate change must be acknowledged, and thus women should be core participants because, as I said, a theoretical approach that is ecofeminist and feminist in general recognizes that where women are connected and we see the ties of women to the environment, we do have greater transformation and reduced impacts. Direct connections to food system and the key role of food ecosystems is key because we see how within our region climate events affect our food system resilience. And who we understand as vulnerable is important, but who we understand as agents of change is equally important. So let us then explore, as we accelerate action, cognitive, normative, and symbolic components that prop up or challenge, speak to power, sociopolitical, cultural, and affective components that prop up or speak to and challenge mechanisms of power. And we must then, of course, understand how we incorporate and empirically test our philosophical perspectives, be they feminist, be they ecosystem approach, be they ecofeminist, whatever framework we apply, addresses the positions and statuses of women as a vulnerable group and other vulnerable groups in context. So I end quoting Centeno from 2020, who in describing their work, I thought it's well suited to our context today. The aim of this work is to show an analytical route to reveal the terms in which climate change is explained. How do we understand this thing? How do we know what we know? The knowledge that is privileged or underprivileged, the type of actions that are promoted or not supported, the positions in the decision-making process, the inclusion of women and other vulnerable groups, the gender agenda on climate policies and economic policies, as well as the narratives offered to imagine a common future. It is through this process that ecological phenomena acquire meaning and become important. They constitute the filters through which social action unfolds in response to an environmental problem, and I would add, rooted in relations of power. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Dr. Barrett, for that very powerful call to action for analysis that is intergenerational, intersectional, multi-stakeholder, multi-sectoral, et cetera, that to better inform our evidence base for decision and policy making. Dr. Haynes, the floor is yours for some opening remarks, please.
So greetings, everybody, and thank you so much to the organizers. Thank you so much for this invitation. I really have only two interventions that I want to share as part of an opening. And the first one, I want us to think about, when I'm thinking about the framing of thinking about gender, climate, and economic justice, I think about development alternatives for women, with Women for a New Era, Dawn, of which Caribbean people were at its founding, of which Caribbean feminists continue to be a part of working with that network, including colleagues of mine at the Nita Barry unit, Dr. Danielle Bob, and also Leanne Worrell, doing some good work with Dawn that has been published with them in relation to the pandemic. But Dawn had a political and also research track called GEJ, and it was called Gender, Economic, and Ecological Justice. And that has existed for a while. And that really is part of a long history of transnational feminists making these connections and insisting on an analysis in which we think gender justice, ecological justice, and economic justice at the same time. And for me, returning to some of that work that Dawn did and understanding the process by which this kind of a framework, not just for policy interventions, for action, but also for research, for the kind of activism that Dawn does transnationally with women from the Global South as the lead and as the center. I think that what they offer in that gender, economic, and ecological justice framing is central for how we should think about these issues moving forward. The connections that they make between the coloniality of climate, neoliberal modes of capitalist accumulation, extractivism, meaning the idea that we could infinitely extract more and more and more out of what are actually really finite resources, and that our economy should be based on extractivist industries that take, like tourism or like mining, for example. And making those connections between the coloniality of climate, between an economy that is premised on extractivism and gender injustice, including the insistence that gender ideologies themselves are very much rooted in racist understandings of what it means to be human, that these gendered categories of the human are categories which have either been weaponized or mobilized, for example, against Indigenous and Black people in the Caribbean, or against which we are the other that substantiates the norm. And so for me, that gender, economic, and ecological justice lens allows me to think of all of these things at the same time, and to center the work of activists and thinkers who have insisted on the value of women's care and labor, as well as the fact that that labor underwrites the entire so-called productive economy. And this is something that is very clear in Andaye's work, in Andaye's organizing, and also in Andaye's vision for what liberation would look like, right? And thinking of the opportunities that I have had to learn from women from Red Thread and their own work, for example, with time use surveys and diaries with women, but also how the use of diaries where women take account of the labor that they do, the work that they do simultaneously, consecutively, to reproduce the entire society, but also how for Red Thread, that methodology was also a means of mobilizing women, of organizing women, and of understanding and of saying, if you take the vantage point of women's labor, particularly the labor that is unpaid, that is devalued, the labor that women do to take care of themselves and others, the labor that women do with survivors of sexual and gendered violence, the labor that women do to reproduce the entire economy. If you take that as your starting point, then it reveals for you where the relations of power are, but also where the opportunities for strategic intervention lie. And so for me, I'm offering this framework of gender, economic, and ecological justice, developed by a transnational group of feminists from the Global South, as a way for understanding that the economies in the Caribbean, small, open, vulnerable, and fragile as they are, that there is a history to why our economies are set up the way that they are. And that particular history is very much linked to the ecological almost apocalypse that we are facing. That is very much linked to everything that was said in the opening about the frequency and intensity of storms, about the increase of extreme weather events such as drought, about the effects that it has on things like gender and gender-based violence, about food and nutrition insecurity, that all of these have at their root a particular way of being in the world that is very much racially exclusionary, that is very extractivist, and that suggests that there is only one way in which an economy should be organized. And so I think that in our work as feminist scholars and activists and at the community level, that we have to be very bold in our demands and in our activism and in our claims. And we have to resist the desire to be mainstreamed into systems that do not work for the majority of us. And I think that if we draw on these legacies of Dawn, of people like Andaye, organizers, thinkers like Andaye, always very critical that if we really seek to value what they have offered for us, then we will see some strategic points for entry. Also important for me in thinking about gender, economic, and ecological justice is thinking about food and nutrition security in relation to women's health, especially as someone researching type 2 diabetes in Barbados and learning that in the Caribbean, women have 1.5 times the rate of type 2 diabetes than do men, but that this is also unusual if you look at the global distribution by sex of diabetes. Typically men and women have similar rates, or men might have a slightly higher rate. But in the Caribbean, it is very different, with women with a 1.5 times the rate than men. And so thinking about the range of ways in which unequal relations of gender structure negative outcomes for women across the in terms of economic outcomes, in terms of violence, but a very important outcome in thinking about women's health in relation to non-communicable disease. I know we often think about women's health in relation to sexual and reproductive health and rights. We also have to, at the same time, think about women's health in relation to non-communicable disease and how that is linked to historical and current food and nutrition insecurity across the region, how that is linked to places like Barbados that import about 80% of its food, and food that is often ultra processed and very low in nutrition. And all of these things are connected. The food as a commodity and not as a human right, food as something that should be liberalized as part of trade, something from which increasing profits could be made. We have to make all of these connections across understanding climate variability, understanding unequal relations of gender and how they manifest, and also understanding our economies and how we can actually begin to make them work for the majority of people. And it's important to have this understanding because government initiatives that seek to respond to the economic and other fallout from disaster, policies that intend to do good, policies that intend to do good, to be benign, can themselves reproduce unequal relations of gender. And I'll give just one example. So if the funds that a state is providing in the aftermath of a hurricane provide greater support financially for owners of assets, and the persons who were owners of assets were more likely to be men, then even at that moment of which the government understands itself as responding in a way that is positive, that is good, it is also reinforcing women's structural location within the economy. And we know that our Caribbean economies are very highly segregated by gender, with men and women often clustered in different sectors of the economy. And so when you do that, you actually reinforce women's structural location. You reinforce and you reproduce the unequal relations of gender at the very moment that you are seeking to do something good and positive. And so for me, that underscores the kind of analysis that comes not just from academia. I was a little bit disappointed, I have to say, when I found that the 3 heads of the IGDS were all in one panel and the activists were in a separate panel. And I felt that we should actually have a much more intentional way of dialogue, because a lot of the analysis as well is coming from women's organizations. It is coming from women's activists. And that brings me to the second thing that I wanted to share, which was some of the things that the Native Barrier Unit is doing on this area. And one of those things is research with women's organizations, from which you learn that a lot of knowledge is produced within women's organization, a lot of knowledge about these very issues, a lot of analysis about these issues, but also a lot of strategies for intervention and change. And so for me, it is very important to learn from women's organizations, to credit them for the knowledge that they produce, but also part of what academia can do is document, preserve, and make widely available. At the Nita Barry unit, we've also been offering since 1994 the Caribbean Institute in Gender and Development, an intensive training program, and bringing people from all across the region. And some of these participants have done work on women, women in the fishing industry in Union Island, for example, have done work specifically on these areas that address climate. And so there's a lot of different areas of analysis and work being carried out. And I think part of what a session today can really do in a tangible way is make some links. I'm particularly pleased to have the minister here as a discussant, especially because I also want to talk to her about another project that we have been discussing at the IGDS with the University Director of the Regional Coordinating Office and at the Nita Barry unit, which is how we can build capacity with governments to do this gender justice work, particularly in the area of climate and the environment. So for me, I'm going to stop here because I have a slight suspicion that I may have exceeded my 3 minutes, but I am going to stop here and just to say that opportunities like this allow us to come together, to strategize, and then to leave these conversations with concrete collaborative actions that we can take together. And for me, that is what I am hoping for out of this, to be able to advance that work that we want to do with regional governments on building this gender economic and ecological justice capacity.
Thank you, Dr. Haynes, particularly for the reminder that the work on this nexus between climate, gender, and economic justice is not new, and for bringing back some of the work that's been done historically by Caribbean feminists and academics. We have time for, I think, one quick round of questions to the panelists before I turn it over to Minister James, our discussant. And I'd like to start with, again, with Dr. Haynes, because I think you paved the way perfectly for this question. How do we close the gap between evidence activism and policymaking, either from your personal experience at the Nita Barrow unit or just general recommendations that you have? How do we better leverage all of the evidence and the activism and the experience that exists to better inform policymaking?
Yeah, thanks for that. So I would say, if you recall, remember there was some catastrophic flooding in Guyana, and Red Thread organized a meeting between people who had been affected and ministers. And at that meeting, only persons who had been affected were permitted to speak. It wasn't a meeting that we typically, when we have these meetings in the Caribbean and there are representatives of government, there are ministers there, the ministers spends the majority of the time talking, and the minister's speech is the only thing that gets reported in the press. And so Red Thread's flipping of that way in which we do consultation to say the only persons with a speaking role are those who are directly affected by the floods, those who are the front line. For me, that gives us the answer for how we close the gaps. How we close the gaps is that in particular communities on the front line, women's and feminist organizations who are working on the front line of these issues have to be the ones to drive the kinds of policy changes that they wanted to see. So for example, if you went and you talked to women who were working in fisheries, who lost their livelihoods, you would understand that the losses for those women and for their families was not somehow lesser than the losses that a boat owner or a boat captain suffered. And so the attempts to mitigate those losses shouldn't be different, right? And so for me, it is, I don't think it's a difficult question at all. I think that we close the gaps by centering the people on the front lines and centering the organizations that have been able to mobilize and organize with women in very significant ways. So I'm very happy that we have Michelle Irvin here, one of the co-founders of a Productive Organization for Women in Action, who is also working from the location of government. So we see already how sometimes in a single individual, we have also closed some of those gaps. And I'll pause here because I recognize that their other panelists. But for me, I think centering, the answer is very much in, we have so many women's organizations still active that we can learn from. And it is about harnessing that knowledge and putting them at the center of what we are doing.
Right.
Thank you, Dr.
If I
Haynes.
could also just say, just jumping in to piggyback on that, I think one of the ways we close the gap too is in our negotiations with even funders, because so for instance, the IGDS has just done phenomenal work across the region looking at climate livelihoods and indigeneity. And, many times, even in the IGDS, we would want to be able to use some of these findings and work in various ways. As Dr. Haynes has said, centering. So even if the persons who are interviewed or the co-participants and so on can't always be in fora like these, that we are able to ventriloquize those voices with their permission and with their consent. And many times the work has to go through so many iterations and all various types of bureaucracies before we get to actually harness the knowledge that has been gained. And so I definitely think that I definitely want to agree with centering the voices of the persons who are not only doing the work, but are the most affected, the most vulnerable. And that's, even when I was closing saying we have to be serious, we have to be serious about the youth voice, we have to be serious about indigenous voices. As Dr. Haynes has said, we have to be serious about the women's groups that have been doing the work and have been putting in this work, not because, if for no other reason than it is life and death. That's the seriousness that we need to be entering into these conversations. And so, flagging that, we have done exceptional work with numerous communities just recently, and that, we do hope that this work sees the light of day really very soon and helps in shaping policy through the voices of those who are most affected.
Thank you, Dr. Bean. You mentioned in your intervention the importance of youth engagement. I wondered if you could speak to that in a little bit more detail. How have you engaged young people in your work around climate justice?
Right. So as I was saying, the entry point for me is as someone who is teaching young people who are interestingly from all over the university campus. These are students who are in various disciplines. And even if they do climate work, it's from a scientific point of view. And it's really just amazing to know the ways in which exposing them to the gender climate nexus, looking at indigenous people and just not even recognizing that indigenous people are still in Jamaica, still in the region. Those light bulb moments are critical for me as points in which we have to do more with the youth. It has to be through public education. It has to be being where the youth are through social media and engaging them in creative ways, because really these are the ones who are going to have the energy and the strategies to reach others of their generation. And I also wanted to point out that there are some very critical youth groups that are doing very important work across the region. But speaking for Jamaica, as I said, Girls Care, which was started by one of our colleagues at the UA-Mona in the Department of Faculty of Science and Technology, which specifically focuses on that youth voice and young girls doing the work of climate justice in their everyday lives. And when we get to amplify those, and that's why I said, these should be household names, Girls Care and the Jamaica Youth Council. These should be household names in discussions and dialogues around climate justice, because they are doing fantastic work in communities, and they're not only doing the work for the older generation, but are spreading the word among young people as well. And one of the things that I have done, just to pause there to give you a chance to ask another question, one of the things that I have done is to ensure that our classes are integrating that perspective. So we will have members from these groups coming to speak to, the young people, because really, as much as we can talk and impart, they really best learn from themselves. And so bridging those gaps and creating those opportunities for the groups to come into the university classroom as well is something that we're passionate about at the IGDS.
Thank you, Dr. Bean. And then to close out this round of questions, Dr. Barrett, you made a very strong case for strengthening our analysis. I wondered if I could have your thoughts as well on closing that gap between the analysis and policy and decision making.
Sure, thank you so much. So I'll map that my response onto the grounded and situated knowledges that both colleagues have foregrounded, as well as accounted for the voices that truly matter in terms of how we experience vulnerability and how we experience decision making that is inclusive, comprehensive, and again, integrated, right? Now, from my perspective, and I think sharing with all of us in this room, we sometimes are really preoccupied with the biological scientific phenomena as real, as well as the notion of implications on human life as real, but the understanding of how those implications manifest. Dr. Haynes described well, Dr. Bean also described to some degree, it's oftentimes either elided or lacking. And so one might use an entry point of life and livelihood. One must use an entry point of the work of advocates and activists within the women's movement, within other movements in the region, intersecting movements. Why? Because having worked on projects, the St. Augustine campus have been involved around flooding, around fire, around preservation of fisheries, around land ownership, around food security and energy and water justice and so forth. You recognize that funding, resources, partnerships, policy interventions, while accounting principle, was a gender thing, as they say, the understanding that gender becomes a central category of analysis to life and livelihoods, resilience, adaptation, intersectionality, and so forth is something that remains a work in progress. My recommendation then would be we of course ground our knowledge in the perspective of the experiencing subject. That would be those who live it, work it, feel it, and have to recover from it, one. And we privilege that knowledge as real knowledge, not just, oh, I should account. We should have consultation. It must be recognized as knowledge, the knowledge that informs our action. And secondly, I would say the other thing is we have to continuously map in what I would say a mixed methods approach, a capacity for quantitative as well as quantitative understandings of how these things shift over time, how from each season, dry to wet, hot to cool, or it's generally hot, what happens, how it happens, why it happens, and how vulnerabilities escalate, or how action by those who are rooted, those knowledges that we take as real, has allowed us to kind of mitigate or confront and respond to some of the vulnerabilities that pre-existed, that emerge, and that will emerge. So I would say that we bridge that gap across all of these sectors by recognizing that unless we see the rootedness of life and livelihood, we will always be operating with limited knowledges for action.
Thank you, Dr. Barrett. To close out this panel with some final reflections from the policymaking side, I'm very pleased to give the floor to the Honorable Karine James, the Minister for Climate Resiliency, Environment, and Renewable Energy of Grenada. Minister James, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Hilary, and thank you to the Inter-American Commission of Women of the OAS, the Institute for Gender and Development Studies at UE, and all the other organizers for bringing us together for this critical conversation. I mean, it is truly an honor to be a part of a discussion that brings together some of the most powerful, educated, and intellectually robust women in our region. And I think, leaders who are not only shaping policies, but driving evidence-based transformative change. So for me, I have been listening intently, and I must commend the speakers before me for their thought-provoking insights, the depth of their research, the intersectional perspectives, and the real-world examples shared have really reinforced how urgent it is to take bold, inclusive action on gender, climate, and economic justice. I especially wanted to highlight two key points raised that deeply resonated with me. The absolute necessity of actively involving youth and women in climate justice, not as beneficiaries, but as decision makers. I think that point was made by Dr. Delia. And the critical link between gender, climate, economic justice, and health, particularly the rise of non-communicable diseases in climate vulnerable communities, something that we don't often hear about. So it was interesting to, see these connections. And I believe it reminds us that the climate crisis is not just an environmental challenge, but it is a social, economic, and health crisis that demands holistic, intersectional solutions. And so I'm happy that these points were brought across not only by Dr. Delia, and I think it was Dr. Haynes, but it was a common theme throughout all of the presenters before me. Now, as a young woman leading the Ministry of Climate Resilience, Environment, and Renewable Energy in Grenada, it's one of the ministries that many have dubbed as, a senior ministry that is not fitting for a young woman like myself. But going out of that, I am deeply aware that climate change is not just an environmental crisis, as I shared, but it is a justice issue, particularly so for women and vulnerable communities in not only Grenada, but other small island developing states. And I'm happy that the correlation was made in terms of the global south and the vulnerabilities that exist there. So for us here in Grenada, climate justice means recognizing that women bear a disproportionate burden in times of crisis. And if my immediate memory serves me right, after Hurricane Beryl devastated parts of Grenada and more so Carriacou and Petit Martinique, I saw firsthand how women, many of them single mothers, many of them, are directly linked to the marine economy as fish vendors and caregivers. They were on the front lines of recovery efforts. They were not just victims of the disaster, as we often see them, but they were also problem solvers, community mobilizers, and resilience builders. So in my role, I have actively worked to integrate gender responsive approaches into climate policy and disaster management. And this has been ongoing for my ministry through the interconnection and the great working relations that we have between the Ministry of Social Development and Gender Affairs. Oftentimes, ministries work in silos. They don't see the correlation between the jobs that they do, and in most instances, we duplicate the works. And so we have been able to bridge that gap at the intergovernmental level to working in tandem with other ministries, particularly so for social development, to enhance that gender responsive approach, and to, in most cases where it didn't apply, to create gender responsive approaches in terms of how we deal with climate policies and disaster management. Now, we are also ensuring that post-disaster housing policies prioritize women headed households, and that economic recovery efforts create opportunities for women in renewable energy. It's something that is brand new to us as a country. Sustainable agriculture, we're seeing more and more young women coming forward to wanting to capitalize on some of the incentives we have there, and climate smart industries. So I firmly believe that if we are serious about climate resilience, we must be serious about investing in women's leadership at every level, whether in local disaster committees, national climate funds, or global negotiations. And I recall, one of the first experiences that I had when I was given the portfolio by Prime Minister, just 16 days, not having any academic knowledge or any working knowledge due to experience in the field that I'm now leading, how timid and how afraid I was to really lend my voice to the negotiations that was happening at the Petersburg dialogue in Germany. And I think that stemmed as a result of, whenever you think of climate justice and you look and you see some of the actors that have been involved in the whole climate space and climate resilience and renewable energy, you often see most times there are more matured persons who have been there for years talking the same language, and we can't really, associate the actions and and the climate funding to that of the type of the level and the amount of negotiations held. And so for us, it is not just incorporating, young women. And certainly for me, I am not just incorporating young women at these tables in negotiations at the regional and global stage, just to check off a box that we have young women advocating and lending their voices. But we really and truly have to ensure that they are meaningfully engaged. And a point was raised earlier that resonated with me, in that we must be serious about actively involving youth and women in climate justice. And climate change is not, a future issue. It is happening now, and young people are already leading in resilience building efforts. We are creating the spaces for young climate activists and women-led organizations to have a direct seat at the table in shaping policies, not in an inferior way, not as we know it in traditional forms, but to meaningfully engage them into it, ensuring that their perspectives move from the margins to center of decision makings. And so if we do not actively include them, we risk designing policies that fail to reflect the realities of those most affected. And this was a key point that came out of the discussions for me. One of the other panelists before me as well made an excellent observation in terms of, and I mentioned it before, the nexus between, the climate and economic justice, and the link to health, particularly non-communicable diseases. And in small island developing states, climate change exacerbates health vulnerabilities. It's not something that we hear often. I'll reiterate that point. More intense heat waves and environmental degradation increase the risk of cardiovascular diseases, respiratory illness, and food insecurity. And these are issues that disproportionately affect women and economically disadvantage these type of vulnerable groups. So if we are serious about intersectional climate justice, we must ensure that our policies do not just focus on economic empowerment and environmental sustainability, but also on climate resilient healthcare systems that address rising non-communicable diseases in vulnerable communities like small island developing states. So for me, as a young woman leading climate resilience efforts in Grenada and by extension our region, I see my role as both as a policy maker and a bridge builder, connecting government, academia, and grassroots movements to drive meaningful change. Climate action cannot succeed if it is disconnected from gender justice. Women are not passive victims of climate change. We are innovators. We are entrepreneurs and leaders in our communities. And so it is our responsibility as policymakers, as researchers and advocates, to ensure that climate solutions are inclusive, just, and transformative. And I think once we are able to do that, if we want evidence-based advocacy to be effective, it must be participatory. And so women's voices and expertise must be recognized as equally valuable as academic research in shaping the policies that determine their futures. So these are just my initial thoughts.
Thank you very much, Minister James, for those remarks to round out a very interesting panel. And may I say on my own behalf, and I think on behalf of most of my colleagues, how amazing it is to see a young woman at the helm of policy and decision making on all of these issues. So congratulations. We are a little bit out of time for this panel. I think if anyone in the audience has questions, please do put them in the Q&A window, and hopefully our panelists will be able to answer them as the seminar moves on. If they're for a specific panelist, please indicate it. Otherwise, it can just be a general question to the panel. So with a big thank you and much appreciation to our 4 distinguished panelists and discussant, I will turn the floor back to Alicia to move on with our agenda. Thank you very much.
Okay, so thank you to our panelists, moderator, and discussant for your insightful engagement, which powerfully underscores why climate change is a gender crisis. Your discussion on the coloniality of climate, particularly in relation to Caribbean histories, extractivist ideologies, and industries deeply intertwined with gender, women's labor, and structural inequalities, highlights the urgent need for a gender-responsive approach. Your reflections on power dynamics, economic systems, and bottom-up strategies for capacity building provide invaluable perspectives on fostering more equitable and inclusive futures. I also want to especially thank you, our moderator, Hilary, for expertly guiding this discussion and facilitating such a thoughtful and engaging exchange of ideas. We will now have a brief interlude with two special readings. First, we will hear from Her Excellency Yolande Smith, Coordinator of the Coordinating Office for the offices and units of the General Secretariat of the OAS in member states, who will share an excerpt from Reflections, Stories for Inspirations. Just a brief background. Yolande Smith is a native of Grenada who leads a staff of professionals across the Americas dedicated to actively promoting the organization's core principles and ideals. Before assuming her present role in September 2023, she was the ambassador of Grenada to the United States of America and served simultaneously as Grenada's permanent representative to the OAS and non-resident High Commissioner to Canada from November 2018 to June 2023. Between January and September 2019, Ambassador Smith served as the chair of the Inter-American Council for Integral Development and the chair of the Permanent Council and a second term as chair of the CIDI in 2022. Ambassador Smith has over 29 years in the diplomatic service, with earlier postings in Toronto, Canada, and Miami, Florida. She possesses a diploma in social work, a Bachelor of Science in Information Systems, and a Master of Business Administration with emphasis on international marketing. She is passionate about the environment and the empowerment of women and young people. Ambassador Smith was the first female president of the Grenada National Youth Council and co-hosted a one-hour radio youth program. She is the author of Reflections, Stories for Inspiration, as well as the host of the YouTube Reading Corner, Storytime with Miss Yolande. Ambassador Smith has one daughter and two grandchildren. So over to you, Ambassador Smith. So it's all welcome.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator. Apparently, I ticked all the boxes based on the conversation this morning. Oh, I am just so thrilled to be here, and I really appreciate the angle that this forum seeks to explore. And I know you asked me to read, but I can't help but just talk a little about the intersectionality and how it enhances the effectiveness of activism. And I just want to piggyback on something my minister said. This intersectional approach allows us to see that the issues of gender equality, climate change, and economic disparity doesn't just coexist, but they collide and they compound. And it creates unique opportunities for us and the people who are at those intersections. So as I prepare to share, when I was asked to do this, I thought of sharing on advancement, and I want to share just a little piece. It's almost at the back of the book, and it speaks a lot to what my minister said just a while ago. I was invited to join a panel of amazing, successful women from vastly different backgrounds to discuss female advancement and gender inequality through a global lens. We shared, among other things, how being a woman has been beneficial, how it has affected our career paths, and whether gender added challenges to our chosen fields. I remember thinking the benefits of being a woman. I have only to channel my mother and my grandmother, and I confess being biased because just being a woman is beneficial. We are compassionate, strong, resilient, and fearless. Fearless not because we don't have fear, but because we don't let fear paralyze us. But sadly, I had to admit that a major challenge for me was gender bias and earning the respect of my male counterparts. This was prevalent in the 1980s when I was a youth officer, and still today. In most situations, it's subtle, but I have been shocked and offended by the condescending offers of help from the men. The unspoken, you're inexperienced, as ministers say, that portfolio is probably too big for you, and I'm just ad-libbing here. I would have to guide you. You're young, you're inexperienced. While from the women I hear, you got this, girl. You can do this. I will support you if you need to. You got this, sister. And I'm always grateful for women allyship, which I have in my intimate, close circle of girlfriends. But I'm more vigilant in advocacy so that we can witness this in every space and every field and every industry. As we celebrate our advancement and achievements, we need to encourage each other and to own our successes, take credit for our achievements and our advancements, and find avenues to shore each other up and not tear each other down. It is important to be champions for one another and be role models for younger women. As a society, and certainly as women, we cannot overlook the fact that women and girls were hit hard by the COVID pandemic, and it goes back to what the panelists said as well. Women have been in the forefront of this pandemic and every disaster or crisis, you name it. The challenges we face, the obstacles we continue to overcome, and the contributions we make daily must fully be acknowledged, even if it goes largely unpaid. If we are being judged as a collective, the record will show that we as women have achieved a lot. We have made significant advances, and many are quick to remind us. But women's issue cannot be an item on an agenda without women having a seat at the table and being part of the conversation. Women know firsthand the challenges we face, and we know the value of the contributions we make. We know how we can influence development of all levels, culturally, economically, and in terms of peace and stability as well. So who can present a more well-rounded perspective to leadership and decision-making on issues specific to women's development? Women. I rest my case. Thank you very much for the opportunity to do this. And I just want to say as well that this forum gives us a chance as well to hear stories, and stories are important because at the heart of it are the voices of women, and it shapes our identities and experiences. So these stories not only reflect personal journeys, but also resonate to a broader movement for justice. And therefore, I thank the organizers again for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Smith, for adding your valuable perspective on the complexities of womanhood and for highlighting the significant advances that we have made in addressing women's issues. Next, we will hear from Her Excellency Joseph Henry Martin, Ambassador of the Permanent Representative of St. Kitts and Nevis to the OAS. She is the champion of youth empowerment, and Henry Martin is the ambassador of St. Kitts and Nevis to the United States of America and permanent representative to the Organization of American States. In these roles, she upholds her nation's principles and priorities on the global stage while fostering collaboration across the Americas. She dedicated her early career to culture and youth development, serving as Director of Culture and later as Parliamentary Secretary for Culture and then Minister of Information, Culture, Youth, and Sports upon her election to the National Parliament in 2000. Ambassador Henry Martin's diplomatic journey began in 2005 with assignments in the United Kingdom and the United States. Her historic appointment as the first female ambassador of St. Kitts and Nevis to the US in 2011 also encompassed roles as permanent representative to the OAS and concurrent non-resident ambassador to Mexico and Paraguay. From 2015 to 2023, ambassadors served in various roles at the OAS, including Chief of Staff to the Secretary General and Advisor to the Assistant Secretary General. Her responsibilities included coordinating the offices of the General Secretariat across the Americas, during which she led 2 OAS electoral observation missions, underscoring her commitment to democratic governance and transparency. So we welcome you, Ambassador.
Thank you very much, moderator. Let me also join in adopting the protocol already established and to say just how proud I am and honored to be among the organizers and distinguished panelists. I want to say a special salute to all of the women as we celebrate International Women's Month. But I have so much in common with everyone, but particularly with Minister James. I remember being a young elected parliamentarian myself, and the only female among men in that cabinet. And so salute to all of the women. I applaud you for your efforts, and I thank you for what you're doing for and on behalf of the region. The poem that I've written, especially for this occasion, is entitled Women on the Front Lines of Fire, Winds, and Flood. The sea does not require our permission to rise, nor does the sun need to beg to burn us from the skies. Violent storms carve alphabetical names into the backs of the poor, so that hunger knocks hardest at the huts of the dispossessed's door. The wind does not ask whose home it will destroy. The drought does not pause for the thirsty, malnourished girl or boy. But in the dark shadows of climate's towering might, women, the marginalized, the vulnerable, bear burdens hidden from the light. Climate change is no Robin Hood. It does not steal from the rich for the poor or their good. Instead, it robs the ones cast aside, invisible, left behind, vulnerable, nameless, the forgotten indigent and maligned. Who feels the harshest pain? Who bears this weight? Laborers, the ones whose wealth always forsakes, laborers whose hands plow barren earth, who rise purposefully at dawn to till the dirt, their superhuman inner strength, an intangible symbol of their earthly worth. Women, backbone, bridge, and balm, carrying nations in their breasts and in their tired palms, tilling fields, mending seams, shouldering the weight of present home and future dreams. Yet when the floods come, when droughts devour, they are few and far between in the halls of decision-making and power. Women, we must refuse to settle for the dust and finely chewed bone as we rebuild a world we are constantly told we cannot call our own. When the Caribbean screams for answers over the din of crashing waves, answers for climate action are whispered back from industrialized office caves. Across UWI's halls to rising grassroots cries, in old climate accords and treaties where the ink still waits to dry, women must gather, warriors all, lifting voices standing tall. SIM must lead as the fierce winds attack. If governments waver, we will feel the crack of Mother Nature's vengeance on our backs. Climate change is a war declared, a shattered path. We must avoid her furious wrath. This fight is far more than land or trees, or lost shorelines or dying seas. It is for justice and survival to claim, for the vulnerable, robbed of economic power, stripped of name. We will engage in no more whispers, no more pleas. We will rise and raise our voices as loud as the very surging seas. For nature never loses wars, and time is long spent for our convenient procrastination and pause. The women who hold up the world beneath the sun of burning skies, where oceans rise and futures stand to die, must wage the climate battle determined and fierce for balance, for climate justice, for life. Here come the warriors, bold and unbowed, women in councils, their voices loud, scholars and sisters, the backbone of toil, mothers of justice, defenders of their sons and daughters and of the soil. At UWI, in SIM, in halls of decree, they carve out policies fierce and free. From markets to ministries, villages to streets, they turn the wheel and step by step, they enter halls of power to take a stand and their well-deserved seats. The call is clear. Governments must rise with armies moving, vision in their eyes, for change is not gifted. It must be won by those who dare, by those who must not tire as they run. We will not wait as waters swell, as fields lay bare, as forest trees are felled. The wombs of nature, the wombs of nations, strong and wise, will hold the world and build the dream until at last it thrives. And when at last the tides subside, when dark, ominous clouds no longer veil the sky, let it be known, let history write, it was women's busy hands that turned the tide. Not bowed by fear, nor chained by doubt, but fierce in truth, their voices loud. For justice, for balance, for life they toiled, a worthwhile battle for climate action and for a better world. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Smith, Ambassador Henry Morton, for sharing your moving point, which powerfully demonstrates the urgency of conversations on climate change, such as the one taking place today, and a critical need to foreground women and the environment. Your words deeply resonated with us and provided a poignant and emotional perspective on the pressing need to address this vital issue. We will now transition to our next session, Perspectives from the Field, a conversation with activists and practitioners. This discussion brings activists and practitioners to the table, focusing on community-based solutions for gender, climate, and economic justice. The panel will be moderated by Michelle Irvin, co-founder and coordinator of the Productive Organization for Women in Action, or POA. Michelle Irvin has been a community worker and advocate for over 25 years. This community activist and human rights defender resides in Belize. In 2019, she received the MBE Award in recognition of her community work with POA, the organization she coordinates and helped founded in 2003. Her community-based women's group, born in 2003, is based to fight for the rights of women and girls to exist peacefully, free from gender-based violence and gender discrimination. Under Michelle's leadership, the group has grown into a very vibrant peer-to-peer education women's group, reaching far into communities and working to transform the lives of women and their families. Under Michelle's leadership, POA has developed projects and programs based on principles of respect, human rights, and equity to combat the spread of HIV/AIDS and all forms of violence against women. These objectives are achieved through education, advocacy, and services that POA provides directly and through linkages with other organizations. POA is one of the women's groups that pioneered advocacy and support for LGBT rights, especially lesbian women and girls, and women's sexual and reproductive health and rights. Other panelists include Khadija Williams of the Jamaica Network of Rural Women Producers, Christine Samaru, founder and managing director of the Breadfruit Collective Guyana, Tana Leah Asu, founder of We Umafu Suriname Cooperative. And I now hand over to our panel moderator, Michelle Irvin, who will lead us through this discussion.
Thank you very much. It has been a powerful morning. My mind is just racing, and I have learned so much, and I want to thank my colleagues and other activists and panelists for just putting some perspective on these issues, these very powerful issues. Having said that, I am here today to moderate a session of activists and women who are on the ground and trying to bridge the gap between academia, policy, communities, as well as climate, gender, and economic justice. Quite a tall order. So first of all, let me introduce to you one of two panelists. Unfortunately, some of our panelists had health issues and was not able to be here. So, we have two, but I'm sure the two we have will make up for 4, 6, 22 if needs be. So let me tell you about who we have here today. We have Dr. Khadijah Williams, and she leads the Research and Education Committee of the Jamaica Network of Rural Women Producers and is a dedicated activist for women and youth in agriculture. With a career spanning over 3 decades, she is dedicated to bridging academia with real-world application to foster innovation and drive social change. Her work as an international development consultant and visiting professor at international universities adds to her global experience. Dr. Williams currently heads the Research and Development Department of, having a little problems pronouncing this name, but I'll try my best, Montague College of St. Anne's, Jamaica, as a research officer and is the honorary consultant at the CELIS UWI Mona. She is co-founder of Rural Regional School in St. Anne's, Jamaica, promoting youth in agriculture, Village Initiative Foundation, Village Academy, Jamaica, and is affiliated with other esteemed institutions where she holds leadership position. In 2024, Dr. Williams was honored with the Jamaica Agricultural Society's prestigious award for phenomenal women in agriculture. Her published work covers a range of critical topics, including social agriculture and rural youth during COVID-19, Caribbean migration, residential childcare, innovative community-based practices, women in agriculture, gender-based violence, and COVID-19 vaccines acceptance and uptake in the Caribbean. She is also a wife and mother of 2 young children. So please welcome Dr. Khadijah Williams, our first panelist. Now let me tell you about the second panelist that is here with us today, and her name is Tonya Lau Asau, and forgive me for the pronunciation. She is the founder of UMA for Suriname, We the Women of Suriname Cooperatives. And she is the founder and president of a women's cooperative that has added value to the leaders of rurality of the Americas by the Inter-American Institute of Cooperation on Agriculture. We is the first female agriculture cooperative in the Democratic Republic of Suriname and was founded in 2013. The members are hard-working rural women from the hinterlands who were subjected to providing for their family with limited access to sustainable income. They have managed to provide for their families of many generations by farming without much support from the banks or other established organizations. We was started based on the ideals, dedication, and tenacity of these strong women who have worked so long and so hard without seeing any financial improvement in their lives or very nominal financial improvements in their lives. We is not only the voice and the spirit of these phenomenal women, but the heart and soul of their entrepreneurial spirit. After many years of hard and unwavering work, many uphill battles and endless sacrifice, we has accomplished a great milestone in 2020 by establishing their own processing facilities. And I will ask Ms. Tanya to pronounce the name because I guess the Dutch in me is not working this morning. And so, but the processing facilities is aimed at education to increase, manage and develop ownership of income. They invest in sustainable agricultural practices, sound processing methods, strong partnership and livelihood, ensuring involvement of its members of all levels. The main crops process and produce is cassava, an important staple for the women. And that's good. I live in Dangrega, Belize, and so as our Garifuna people, we also produce cassava. So I'm happy to introduce these two panelists, and I am excited to hear a bit more about what they do. They will, as the first panelist did, they will do an introduction between 3 to 5 minutes of what they think about the topic and how their work coincide. And so I want us to give them our full attention as I call on Dr. Williams to lead the discussion this morning. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Irving, and welcome to everyone. I want to say a special good morning to the students and the farmers who have sent out the links to. I hope you're there and you're getting a lot from this rich discussion. Yes, so I'm here, as Mrs. Irving indicated, to represent the JNRWP, Jamaica Network of Rural Women Producers. And we are a grassroots organization led by visionary women committed to empowering rural women producers in Jamaica. This also includes girls and boys in agriculture training. So we engage in quite a bit of work with the schools that you have heard in my introduction, Village Academy International, as well as the 4-H Club. Our mission is to promote sustainable agriculture, enhance food security, and foster economic and social development within rural communities. We believe at JNRWP that female producers, whether as farmers or as agro-processors within the Caribbean region, can provide solutions to the projections made by experts to the increasing health crises and infectious diseases, mental health problems, displacement of populations, and so on, which you heard our previous presenters even alluding to, which were brought on not only by climate change, but also as a result of the low resources as imposed handicap, which denies our people the full capacity to demonstrate resilience. As we continue to face the impacts of post-colonial struggles of claiming land rights and navigating cultural norms, we seek solutions as a network of powerful women. And we advocate that the role of the small-scale female farmer must be strategically integrated into national health, food justice policies, education and safety policies as strategic stakeholders for the survival of small island development Caribbean states such as Jamaica. With over 300 members in our network, we are committed to advancing these goals through innovation, collaboration, and resilience as we navigate the socio-politics and geopolitics of our time and context. We have lived the experience of the COVID-19 pandemic, and indeed we must learn from the lessons of inequity and access. as women have lost income and many had to remain at home with their children, reconstructing caring practices and productivity. For women as caregivers, the high cost of nutritious meals, our reliance on imported and processed foods due to affordability is less than desirable for some of us, and particularly our lactating women farmers. Added to these are the perpetuated perceptions of women's capacity, which you would have also heard from the poems and the monologues from the earlier presenters, which does not afford us an equitable role in agriculture. Through our research at the network with rural women producers, we have found that a high percentage of our women continue to struggle with access to land, face violence and harassment, whether at home, on the farms, or at workplaces, and endure the inhumane realities of being progressive rural women producers. As we delve into the psychosocial realities of our women in agriculture, farming and food production, in fear has become a norm among many of our women, and therefore security for women in agriculture must take a place at this table. From our last research, 47.3% of our members have experienced verbal and psychological abuse, 33.6% physical and intimate partner violence. I am truly honored today to be part of this panel, and I look forward to a thought-provoking and enriching discussion where we will explore solutions to this, what we now call ecological apocalypse. I thank you, and I look forward to your questions and feedback.
Great, thank you very much. I would like to invite our next panelist to give her opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Ms. Ella Irving. Good morning, everyone. All protocols observed. Let me start by pronouncing the names. First is Tanya Liu Asu. You know, in the Caribbean, we are a mixture of all cultures, so my last name is Chinese. The name of our cooperative is We Umafusranang. That's our native language. It means we, the women of Suriname, and Surifit is the name of the processing company. It is an honor to join this important conversation on gender, climate, and economic justice. Three interwoven challenges that shape the realities of communities worldwide, and particularly in the Caribbean. As an entrepreneur and advocate for rural women in agriculture, I've seen firsthand how rural women, the backbone of our food systems, are disproportionately affected by climate crisis and economic precarity. In Suriname, where we work with We Umafusranang and Surifit, we empower women farmers to create sustainable livelihoods from staple crops like cassava and another crop, but that's rare for Suriname, palm tire. But despite their resilience, these women face systematic barriers, limited access to land, financing, and markets barriers. Barriers that are deepened by climate shocks and policy gaps. This symposium marks a crucial opportunity to shift the conversation from recognition to action. If we are to achieve true economic and climate justice, we must ensure that rural women's voices are not only heard, but that they inform decision-making at all levels. We need policies that recognize women as key agents of climate resilience, investing in their leadership, supporting sustainable agro-processing, and securing their economic rights in a rapidly changing world. Gender justice, climate change justice, and economic justice are not separate struggles, they are one. Addressing them collectively will not only uplift women, but strengthen our economies and ensure a sustainable future for all. I thank you for engaging us in the dialogue and working together to drive meaningful change. I also like to applaud all the strong Caribbean women that I've listened to this morning, and a specific applause for the Honorable Young Minister James. Listening to these voices gives me as a person hope that we are on the right path. And by enclosing my opening remarks, I may share with you that we may proudly say that we support over 80 women with a guaranteed and secured income through our collaborative work in Suriname. Thank you.
Yes, round of applause, and thank you so very much for the work that you do. It's amazing. It's just amazing. And as I'm listening, I am hearing, the themes of food insecurity, economic insecurity, violence against women, both physical and economic, and the loss psychological as well. And so women's health, women's mental health is also very much affected. And so as you continue to work with women, this goes out to we from Suriname, especially as it relates to using a traditional crop, yuca, cassava, that is very much known throughout the Caribbean and sometimes the South, the global South. And I've been hearing that it's pretty much tied to food security, because if we think about how resilient the crop is and how you could use and you have been using indigenous technologies to process this crop. I was just in Suriname and I did buy my cassava bread. Um, and we call it here in Belize ereba. And so I was thrilled to come home to eat and to see the similarities between the ones we make and the ones that was made there. And so I am interested in hearing from you how you think that we could extend women's processing and women's in agriculture throughout the CARICOM region, for us to strengthen, maybe with systems such as the OAS, to strengthen that kind of partnership to further grow women economic empowerment, to address the issues of climate, because the crops that we're using and the crops that we're doing are sustainable and very resilient. And so how could we infect, so to speak, and spread the word about your work and about the crops and about the technologies that is very much indigenous to the Caribbean region? Help me.
Thank you very much. I always say that those organizations, those international developing organizations can, first of all, definitely support us by constantly promoting what we are doing, being promoters. And let me give a practical example.
Sure.
Because we are very pragmatic persons.
Yes.
Starting with what we are doing. We know we work mainly with women in the field, grassroots women. In Suriname, it's even worse because they doesn't even speak our native language. So they speak their own language, which makes the barrier even bigger. So what we have done is that we've looked at crops, resilient crops, that they are actually farming for decades because of their food securities. Usually their man goes into the fields to look for gold, wood, etc. So they are being left alone for a very long time. And these women needs to take care of their children. So they have to assure that they have food on the table. That's the main reason why they have farmed for decades. Now we taught them how to capitalize and get income out of the surpluses, because usually when they have a lot of produce, they share amongst themselves. But now you can build on that and make sure that you sell it to persons in town. So what we did is we analyzed with them on their level of understanding the value chains of different crops that they are used to farm for decades. So we closed the gap of teaching them how to farm. The only thing we did is bring them up to the level that they can adapt the good agriculture practices and that they can adapt the climate smart techniques. But farming on its own is something they do with close eye. So that was already an advanced position for us. Then we looked at the development of the value chain. And the first thing we started with was a forgotten baby food that was actually produced by the Amerindians. So nobody worked with that baby food anymore, although it raised children for decades. So we looked at it and we professionalized it. And now that same baby food is fortified. And we may say that we are the only organization in Suriname for the first time of the history of Suriname, almost 50 years of independency. We are the first organization that produces our own weaning child food that meets up to the standard of Codex Alimentarius. It's a complete formula. Why I'm explaining that is that because of the disadvantages that we have, what we should do in the Caribbean is look at our strengths. We should identify the strengths and build on those. Look at the crops and the products that we are famous of, professionalize them, and let's conquer the world with our products. And those developing agencies can make sure that everywhere they go, if there is a product with a well-developed value chain where many rural women or youth are earning their income from, promote it. Make sure that that will be your present that you give to ministers or ambassadors or whoever. Those small things can make a huge impact.
Thank you very, very much. And I do concur with your salient knowledge. And so we hope to be able to continue that. And so I would like to ask Dr. Williams if she would like to add to that.
Yes, certainly.
Good.
Certainly. So 3 areas I see that could be useful. One, I'll put on top of the list, collaboration with research. And I draw on Tanya's point where use what already is in existence, what's working. So we work with the community-based colleges and schools, work with the young people. We must put the young people in the center for our sustainability. And we conduct research. And with that, support intergenerational projects. There's a lot that we can learn from our more mature senior farmers, knowledge that can be handed down to the young people. And I think through the schools within the various communities in Jamaica, within the region, we can support some partnerships at the top level with funding, as well as it's just a matter. Let me give you an example of one that we did recently at the community-based school. We were funded by an international partner because they came, they assessed, they saw we had quite a bit of wild lemongrass, and then they supported a lemongrass tea project. And the students learned how to process lemongrass for teas, how to bag them, how to package them, how the various uses of lemongrass for mosquito repellents, and so on. So it was a lemongrass project that was indigenous. It was practical. The resources were available. It was a low budget project. So I would say work with what we have. There are a lot of things that are working for us in the Caribbean that we need to tune in to conduct the research. We must research, do the research, and include the young people. So I'll add that.
Thank you very much. And this is for any one of you ladies that have the expertise there, and you're talking about that. And so we want to talk about how do we ensure that policy. You talked about research, and you gave stories about how research and how we both of you did and how we could do that. But now I think that we may also have to push the envelope as it relates to national and maybe I want to say regional policies of how do we ensure women are secure in agriculture? How do we acknowledge them? How do we shift the paradigm in terms of them having access to land? That was an issue that both panelists that you brought up. How do we also shift the mindset of maybe the young people that, traditionally are a women farm. We are a farming people, and women specifically did that. And so it wasn't strange for women to be in the fields and to be producing. And so how do we enhance the image around women producing and also enhance the policy position of ensuring that women get access to the resources that they need to conduct their livelihood. Resources meaning land, especially apart from other technical and other supportive um, things.
Yeah.
So
I'll go first. Thanks again for that question, and very important, because first I want to start from the position of respect. To get to the table of policy making, we need to be respected and valued. The opinions must matter. I listened to, was it Dr. Haynes and her point? I had to send a lot of hearts while she was saying that, because it's so critical, because even in just looking at the program, yes, we are on the panel for practitioners, for the activists, the advocates, but yet we are also, I'm listening to Sister Tanya, she's a researcher, an indigenous researcher.
yes,
How we first need to integrate practice and education, scholarship, that is critical. I want to say at the Jamaica Network of Rural Women Producers, we have advocated tirelessly, and our president has managed to make we have a few of the women who are now on the Rural Agricultural Development Authority board as advisors, and we ensure that women are always getting a fair share, or if not too fair, at least a satisfying share of the resources that are being distributed. But even in sitting at the table, I go back to respect. We have to portray ourselves, believe in what we are doing. I like what Ambassador said about having that group of women who, when you sit at a table with about 7 men, there's going to be some gender bias comments, there are some expectations, and you just know. So sometimes I'm in meetings and I'm texting my woman, just to be encouraged, because you know that you are being subtly disregarded or what we say, minimized. Yeah, you're being patronized. So the respect is so important for us. So we are there, we're doing the work. We would not say that we have arrived, but we are doing the work. And that's why, again, I go back to the young people who we have to coach and mentor, so they see what we have started, so they can continue, and that these practices of us sitting at the table to influence policies become institutionalized, and not because I am Dr. Williams, I was selected, or so on. It must be the regular grassroots person who we coach and mentor that can represent the masses of women. And with that being said, we have managed to have influence the Ministry of Agriculture here in Jamaica. So with the new project of agro-park lands, 25% of the lands will be allocated to women. So that's just one actionable item as I bring that to the table and show you the influence and the impact on the power of women's voices in policy.
Thank you very much. And Ms. Tanya, do you have anything to add?
Yes, so first of all, because I am not, I have quite a few things to add, but since I'm not English speaking, I thought on the most important things I wrote down my thoughts to make sure that I don't forget anything. Land is a very crucial and sensitive topic in Suriname at this moment. It is plain and simple. We as women do not get access to land. Plain and simple. Even worse, the indigenous people who are actually the landowners are not being respected. So personally, my approach was differently, and I encourage all of the women that work with us to do the same. You know, in life, everybody wants to be part of a success story. So we do not knock too much on doors of policymakers. We do the work, we take action, and we demonstrate. And now, after 10 years, we may say that we have established a organization, a facility that governments have not been able to do for 50 years. And suddenly it's such a big deal. And suddenly everybody wants to be part of it. Remember that we even have the highest food safety certification, FSSC 22000, which we achieved with women without a formal Western education. I'm really proud to say so, because only 7 other firms, big firms in Suriname, has this certification. But let me give the exact keys that I wrote down. For Suriname, to ensure women's voices are heard in policy making, because I think that we are lacking a lot on that point, we must adopt a structured and inclusive approach that integrates women-led organization and rural women's perspectives. The key recommendations are: establish a formal advisory council where women organizations actively contribute to policy decisions. Mandate gender representation quotas in policy-making bodies. Ensure diverse female leadership. On funding and capacity building, we can say that allocate dedicated funding for women-led organizations to engage in advocacy and research, and training programs to enhance women leadership and negotiation skills in policy dialogues. I will keep it here because there is much more, but let me close by saying that implementing all these areas that we actually pointed out, like 5 or 6 areas, which I think are important. I think that Suriname, if they are willing to implement these or at least start the discussion, we can create a more inclusive and equitable policy-making environment where women actively shape decisions that impact their lives and communities. Because I will tell you, if you go into the interior and you ask one of these women if they have ever heard of women organizations that advocate on policy making for and women's rights, they will tell you no. So we have a long way to go in Suriname.
Well, thank you so very much for that. And I think that I will just use my moderator privilege, just voice here at this moment, just to say how I really admire as grassroots women organize, and indigenous women, coming up and doing what they do. But most importantly, I think the issue that we talked about, respect, or for women to have that confidence to understand that what we do or what they are doing is very important. They have been able to feed their families. They have been able to ensure food security. They don't have to know to write a word in English, to talk a word in English. Mine sometimes is back way, front way. We shouldn't worry about that. We should bring our voice the way we are to the table and ensure that it is heard, and let everyone know, regardless of who it is, the president, the chairperson at CARICOM, the OAS people, I don't know who else there is, but we should just get that confidence. So I thank you both, especially for exuding that. And I think just if women are just listening to you, you are passing on that energy of total commitment and respect for what women are doing, even if we think that there are some quote unquote shortcomings by colonial and westernized standards. But if we have that prejudice in our minds, for us to then move forward against that, to ensure that we continue to build that confidence, and women have agency, people, not only women, at all the intersections of these issues have agency. It's just for them to know that they can use their agency to ensure that those issues of gender, climate, and economic justice are addressed. So for me, I really want to say how much respect, because I think the work that you are doing are it's not considered sexy, it's not considered romantic, it's the dirty work, it's the rough and dirty work. And so you are transitioning that quote unquote dirty work to respectful work, to food security work, to economic development work, to climate change work, to climate resilient work. So I think that's you are right at that nucleus of all these issues. So I want to give you guys the last word. If you want to say anything else as it relates to your advocacy, your work, the stories of the women that you represent here today, I open up to you, my esteemed panelists, to do that right now.
May I go?
Go.
Okay. First of all, I'm very happy to being able to participate. And yes, you have seen, even though we are working in the field and we have very busy schedules, we made sure that we are at the table. And that is what should happen. We, the women in the Caribbean, should now demand and not being given. We need to demand the seat at the table. And I'm very happy to see my colleague sister, Dr. Khadija, because I'm also the president of SUNRUP, Suriname Network of Rural Women Producers, and we are engaged in a regional body, CANRUP, Caribbean Network of Rural Women Producers. And I may say to the OS and all the participants here that we are now working on strengthening, and as we say, the reborn of CANRUP. It was always there, but we've recognized that we have to strengthen it now and come together and put our strategic planning together, how we will make sure that policymakers and everyone in the Caribbean will know that we are the body to speak with, to talk with, and to make sure that the voices of these rural people in the Caribbean and the youth are being heard in terms of inclusion, in terms of agriculture, in terms of resilience. So maybe we can engage much more with the OAS, and you will definitely hear from us very soon. Another thing that I would really like to advise is that we are very viable people in the Caribbean. And I think that we should try to learn from each other. We need to engage much more to interaction in the fields with grassroots people who can teach others how they are doing the work and how they are surviving. And I will close by saying that we fully recognize that we are responsible. We, the women, are responsible and take responsibility of the food security in the Caribbean and in the world. And I think that the sooner we all recognize that, and the sooner we give the women that recognition, that this world, and especially the Caribbean, will be a much more better place to live in. Thank you.
Kudos, and thank you very much for that. Thank you. And so I invite Dr. Williams to go now.
Thank you again. And I'd like to re-highlight that as you hear me this morning, I'm echoing the voices of over 300 women in our network, and how important it is for us to support each other, as we care for our children and our loved ones, our husbands, our partners, spouses, as we feed the community, and we continue to see the importance of taking care of the land. Yes, I think it is as women, it is our right, it is our duty to take care of the land. And very important, as we say that, I want to close by reminding us of the importance of integrating scholarship and practice, learning from grassroots women who are practicing in some indigenous ways that we can learn, listen to our elders who have brought down indigenous knowledge that our young people need to understand. And we integrate research through our various schools and colleges and other networks, universities. When I say that, I'm not only speaking research as pure science and hard science, but I'm speaking research and also in indigenous research. Yeah, the Caribbean needs to develop a new epistemology because our ontology is different. We have a different existence. We have different experiences with colonialism that have transformed our ever being. And this is what we bring to our network of women. So we talk about food sovereignty and not just food security, because we need to eat the foods that are good for us based on how we have been constructed. So we go and we talk mental health. We talk about the importance of eating those foods that our ancestors brought to Jamaica, brought to Trinidad, brought to Guyana. That is what we want to promote, and not be driven by the economic and the political motives of just producing for export, but producing for our own health and well-being. So sisters, brothers, students, fellow educators, and advocates, the Jamaica Network of Rural Women Producers, we ask you, those of you in Jamaica, spread the word, get every woman, every youth involved in our network as we grow bigger, bolder, and stronger to safeguard our own future. Thank you so much for inviting me to this panel.
So powerful, so powerful. Thank you very much. I just want to reiterate the idea of ensuring indigenous research. And I just want to add one thing as it relates to what you were saying, not only those food that was brought here, but those food that have been here for millenniums, for decades, for centuries, for, our banana flour, our konkante, our gungude, our cassava flour, our cassava bread, our okra, all our foods that we know, our kalalu. And so we have to ensure that those foods, we know that those foods are, I think sometimes we don't even know vegetables. Our children think vegetable is iceberg lettuce and broccoli and cauliflower. And I'm saying, we grow up on kalalu and jokoto and, and those things. That's vegetables. Those are greens. And it is greens from our backyard, from our farm, a few feet away. And so we have perfected the table to farm concept, and we should not be not respected for having that, and we should not lose our identity over profits. Like you said, foods that are really killing us, ultra processed foods that are killing us, as opposed to ensuring that we acknowledge what we have and what we are used to. Our coconut oil, guys, from head to toe, in and out, right? And so these are things that we know are ours, and these are things that we should ensure that we embrace full-heartedly, wholeheartedly, and have our food sovereignty, as you said, and security intact for us. Ensure we have our lands, ensures that we are able to bridge those gaps So I want to, I don't know what the time is. It's just gone with the discussion. It's just beautiful. And I am thankful for everyone. So I will bow out because me myself the wali taka. So we're done right there right now before I start to sing and make sure that we wrap up and have time for maybe some questions from the floor. Thank you very, very much, and hats off, maximum respect to the women who are farming, our custodians of the earth, and for those of you women who are representing them and out here telling us about their triumphs and their trials. Thank you, maximum respect.
Thank you.
Thank you so much to our panelists and moderator for highlighting the importance of good agricultural practices and reinforcing the practicality of centering youth.
Alicia, I'm sorry, we're not really hearing you. Maybe closer to the microphone or
Okay. Is it better?
no.
Okay. Can you hear me now? Hey, can you hear me now?
Very faintly, but not really.
Okay. No? Hello?
Alicia, it seems like your volume has dropped. Your volume has gone down significantly. Maybe your volume?
Alicia, you can check your sound system, your sound settings on Zoom. Just click on the microphone and it might have been affected.
While Alicia is attending to that, I would perhaps just give the floor over to our. We have a question. I'm afraid we're running a bit short of time. If it's a short question, Miss, who was it? Hold on a second. Miss Catherine Seelys, please go ahead with your question. Catherine, did you still have a question? No, all right then. In that case, Alicia, if you're not back, I will hand the floor over to Dr. Angelique Nixon for some concluding remarks and a vote of thanks. She is a senior lecturer and the IGDS Graduate Studies Coordinator at the UA campus in St. Augustine. And Dr. Nixon, please go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. I think it's now solidly the afternoon for all of us, although we might have some folks in different time zones. So, good afternoon. And I've been asked to offer some closing remarks, but also just to reflect, offer some reflections on what we've heard today. But since Alicia has done such a great job of summarizing after each session, I'm going to just move forward with some of my closing thoughts. And I just want to, all protocols observed, but to say an enormous gratitude and also for every single person who's contributed today, but also really importantly, just so thankful for your time, all of the hardworking people on this panel and in these conversations today, and also for your brilliance, your reflections, your research, your incredible dedication and passion to working across gender, climate, and economic justice, which By now, I hope we can all agree that these intersections make absolutely the most sense, and they should be the places at which we are focusing our work. I offer these closing reflections thinking about gender, economic, and climate justice, and the ecological apocalypse in which we are living in the Caribbean region and also across our fellow small island developing states and regions such as the Pacific, who are also dealing with the same and grappling with some of the same issues that we are. I want to reflect on what do we do when the apocalypse is now, and how are we to survive, which I have reflected on elsewhere in my writing and research on these issues. I think about and root my work over the past 2 decades, thinking about how we organize these across these issues in my own community organizing and also in my research on tourism and teaching on gender and development, in which I focus specifically the lens of social and environmental justice for over the past 10 years. And like Dela, my colleague at IGDS, teaching our students about how we understand these issues, I think is so vital and important to the work we do, because I am also inspired by young people who come up with climate solutions, who say these are the things we ought to do, and that we offer them the frameworks to think about how do we, and I offer students the opportunities to come up with their solutions to create projects. So when they go out into the world of work, that they have these intersecting and essentially and these specific kinds of frameworks to do the work that we so desperately need. The past year and a half, I've been engaged as an advisory committee member for the Caribbean Feminist Climate Justice Movement, funded by the Global Fund for Women and facilitated by Sewell in St. Kitts and Nevis. This network includes 21 organizations working across the region at the intersections of gender and climate justice. This network has included, and this work has included building a grant mechanism that is operated regionally with shared decision-making, as well as capacity strengthening for the organizations across gender and climate, and for learning gender and climate justice for the grantee partners. My work also has extended in with CAISO Sex and Gender Justice, which is a feminist LGBTQI+ organization in Trinidad and Tobago, which I'm a director of and work across projects and operations. We've started a new project called Growing Spaces that aims to address housing and food insecurity for LGBTQI+ people through healing justice support systems and facilitating community resilience and gender and climate justice advocacy. In my current research and book in progress titled Submerged Freedom, The Aesthetics of Decolonial Justice, I'm investigating Caribbean social justice movements and cultural productions at the intersections of gender, race, class, sexuality, migration, and the environment. It's a multidisciplinary project that seeks to challenge coloniality and offer decolonial models for social and ecological justice. I insist upon an anti-colonial feminist lens to examine colonial and extractive structures that continue to shape our region, particularly contemporary neoliberal development projects that are extractive industries and the tourism industry. These systems produce racial, gendered, and sexual inequalities and drive environmental degradation, economic precarity, and the migration crises that we exist in. These most pressing issues of our time require radical feminist and decolonial solutions, rooted in expansive calls for reparations, resistance movements, and reimagining Caribbean futures. These entanglements of social and ecological justice and the structures of oppression exist for us within a region that faces unique and overlapping challenges and long periods of sustained and continual crises. We've heard this over through the course of today. As one of the most tourism-dependent regions in the world, our Caribbean countries remain in a double bind of dependency capitalism and foreign investment to sustain economies, most often at the expense of people, culture, and the environment. And so I describe this moment as submerged freedom in relation to rights, justice, and sovereignty, and the challenges and ongoing crises that face the Caribbean region because of our unique vulnerabilities that are produced through colonialism, neocolonialism, and the disproportionate impacts that we face every day of the climate crisis or climate catastrophe that we are living. Submerged is not only a reality for small island states and coastal areas across the Caribbean region, but it is a powerful metaphor for the interlocking systems that limit our freedom and sovereignty. Today, our conversations and speakers have all addressed clearly how the climate crisis in the Caribbean region is exacerbated by historical injustices, disproportionately impacting the daily livelihoods of women and gender diverse people. And it serves as a multiplier for existing inequities. This is why we need the lens of gender, climate, and economic justice. Beyond the acute disasters and post-disasters response that we need, we know that the climate crisis, rooted in colonialism and sustained through neoliberal capitalist patriarchy, demands a response that is not only economic, but also social, political, and cultural. And so addressing the climate emergency and climate coloniality must center a decolonial feminist and indigenous climate justice framework and movement-led approach. These movements are also responsive to the needs of those most vulnerable and marginalized, which we have heard today again and again, that we need at the forefront of our movements and the forefront of change making. And so I want to close with just interventions and highlighting what we've heard so powerfully from our speakers today. Reminders, as I reflected on each panel and each contribution today, that our disaster preparedness and risk mitigation, and by extension then our climate adaptation must include people with disabilities, must include migrants, and gender and sexual minorities, I have to add, particularly sex workers and LGBTQI plus people who are often not included at all in our climate responsiveness. So I want to add that as we close today. And finally, as we think about how we prepare or how we are unprepared for unnatural disasters that continue to increase our vulnerability, that understanding that those most vulnerable and those most marginalized before a disaster will be in most need in its aftermath, and that is how disasters work. And so calling on for our actions to also include reparations, that a call for reparations, not only climate reparations, but the overall call for reparations, because we know colonialism has caused the climate crisis, and it is too often that our movements are separated. And so my final point in closing is to say that our social and environmental justice movements must even be more aligned as we hear the calls for action, for partnerships, for collaboration across different movements. And I've argued in many spaces that any movement we're in must include climate justice. Climate justice has to be at the forefront of all of our movements because it is the most pressing, and it is the one that continues to often divide us. Our social movements can so often be divided by respectability politics, by classism, homophobia, and transphobia, and sexism. And so also calling that our movements and our alliances be willing to work across our differences, learn from each other, and support each other. I'm very inspired today by all of our speakers, by folks working across research, community-based research, very inspired by each and every one of us today. Also really moved to hear the creative contributions and our demand for youth-led and Indigenous-led approaches to the climate crisis. And so I will stop there and hand back over to Alicia.
Okay, can you all hear me? Still no. I'm sorry, Alicia. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Nixon, for that in-depth reflection and that powerful call to action as well to conclude our session here today. I want to extend a big thank you to our panelists, our moderators, our discussants, and I also want to thank the members of the SIM and the IGDS teams who haven't had speaking roles today, but who've been very important to the organization of today's seminar. Yasmin and Gina from the SIMS end, and Dr. Natasha Mortley from the IGDS side. We haven't heard you, but we acknowledge that you're there. We see you, and we thank you for your contributions to this as well. Could we please all turn our cameras on just briefly, so that we can take a quick photo? We lost the minister, but we can Photoshop him or in later. My colleague Gina will take the photo. Natasha, are you there? Dr. Bean? Can we see you, please? There you are, Natasha. Oh, no, there you were. There you are.
So I'm not sure if Dr. Haynes heard that. I know she just got a quick call, so let me just see if I can.
Okay, we can also Photoshop her in afterwards. Yes, oh no, she's an empty screen right now. Okay, not to keep you any longer, I will ask my colleague Gina to go ahead and take the photo. Everyone smile or look at the camera.
1, 2, 3. Okay, thank you.
Thanks very much. Thank you, everybody. Enjoy the afternoon.